So glad that you're here today. We're going to do a sermon today that is called High Risk Prayers. And it's just a one sermon, a standalone message that I think God's been stirring up in my heart, leading us into the Easter season. And the big idea behind today's message is that sometimes there are some very scary prayers that we pray, but they have enormous returns. In other words, there's a big risk in putting ourselves out there before God and praying these kinds of things. There's a lot of trepidation and nervousness, but it can lead to a massive new direction in our lives. When I was in high school, it was the pre-internet age. Many of you might have grown up in a pre-internet age. A lot of the people who are involved in our church don't remember a time before internet. You came to age in an internet time. Phones, cell phones, text phones. That guy really is old. I had a bag phone, or my parents did. And so anyway, this is really hard. Some of you will remember these days. Some of you will not remember these moments. But just imagine with me that you are a high school kid and you see a little girl at school that you really like. And you think you're friends, you kind of talk, you flirt a little bit, and you want to take this girl out on a date. Can you imagine this? Just imagine with me for a moment. You had to somehow find her phone number. You're going to call her house, okay? And you might get it through a friend, or you might know her name is Sarah Jones, and you might just really work it into the conversation, like trying to find out what her parents' names are. And then they had a thing called a phone book. Does anybody remember this? And you would open it up and you'd find the Joneses. And has anybody ever called multiple Joneses trying to find one person? You're like, oh, okay, her dad, I think her dad's name is Patrick. Okay, I'm going to look through that. All right. And you called multiple people's, and then you would pick up the phone. And you might have had one in your room. You might have had a family phone that was on a wall. It was yellow and had a cord about 7 miles long. And you'd take it in to the laundry room, or you would dial the number, and heaven forbid you miss one and it's a 9. You got to go all the way back. It's awful. Then you would call Sarah, let's say her name is Sarah Jones. You're going to call her home and you're going to ask for her because it's not her phone. It's the family's phone, right? And then you're going to get her dad. And her dad is a Marine or something, and say, hello, can I speak to Sarah, please? And then you're like, who's this? And Scotty. And then you'd hear him say something like, Sarah, there's some stupid boy, Scotty's on the phone for you. And you say, who? Scotty. And then you knew it was a bad sign. She's like, who? And then, right? And then she would get on the phone, and sometimes even before they got to the phone, you got so nervous you just hung up. Sometimes you would call the number multiple times. This is before caller ID. Can you imagine a time like that? No caller ID, no star 69. Remember that when that came up? Oh, I'll call you back, and I'll know who you are. Everybody under 30 is like, what is he talking about? But then you would just get up, just enough courage to say to her, hey, would you like to go and do something? Can you imagine this moment? My son has never had to go through this, like to actually have a conversation, or not text or send emojis that they try to figure out of, oh, he's asking me to do something. And then, this is crazy, if she said yes, you didn't know what to do next. You're like, oh, okay, see you at school. And that was it. You don't know what... It's like a dog chasing a car and then you caught it. You don't know what to do with it. But it was this moment of trepidation and fear and risky and scary, but it had the possibility for a huge return. And sometimes in our lives, we come before God, and not in a flippant way, and not in a flare prayer kind of way, but in a way where we're saying, God, would you answer this prayer? And it's a really scary prayer, but it has the potential to have enormous returns in our life. When you came in today, you received a bulletin, and inside that bulletin's a little place to take notes, an outline, to write a few things down. And I encourage you to do that. I say this almost every week, but when we lean in and have the posture of a learner, there's something that happens to us. I think like what we receive is really directly connected to our expectation. And so lean in and ask God to speak to you today. And so the first big, simple, scary prayer that we can pray that leads to massive change in our life is this: Lord, search me and show me. Search me and show me. Now look at this verse. It comes out of Psalms 139, 23, 25. David writing this, and he prays this very risky, scary prayer. God, would you search me and know my heart, test me and know my anxious thoughts, see if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Like that's a scary prayer, right? Sometimes when you're camping or you're hiking, you'll turn over a rock or a log, and what's normally underneath there isn't very pretty, right? A little slimy, a little messy. Not something you definitely want to look at, but that's the kind of prayer this is God, would you turn over some rocks in my heart? Would you kick over a few logs in my soul and let me see what's underneath there? Search me. And here's a couple of words. They're not on your outline, but you should write them down next to in some blank space there. The first word would be motives. Like, God, show me my motives. Like, why am I doing this or that? In other words, sometimes we can do things that are really good, but underneath that is a motive that's not really healthy. It could be sinful. It could be prideful. It could be, hey, look at me of why I'm doing this. Jesus talked a lot about this. He said sometimes we do things publicly that really aren't motivated from the right place privately, and we got our reward because everybody saw us and applauded for us, but God said, I don't like that. That's not what I'm about. When we give sometimes, if we gave so that people would notice or we would get something from it instead of just giving out of the overflow of what God has given to us, and we want other people to take notice, God says, well, you got your reward, and your reward was the applause of men, but not my blessing in your life. Sometimes motives need to be revealed, and we pray, we say, God, show me, search me. How about this? Blind spots. We all have them. Like areas of our life that we just don't see. Places that we're stumbling or we're harming or we're hurting other people that we're just not even aware of in our lives. I've about run into several cars recently. I've just done that. I think it's because I'm getting older and I don't care as much. I used to look and be really cautious, but I'm not checking my blind spots anymore. Maybe it's because I'm older and my car's bigger and I got better insurance, or I don't know. I'm just coming over. Deal with it. Move up. Sometimes we have areas of our life that we don't see, and we need God to shine a spotlight on that, right? Maybe you're a manager, you lead a team at work, and God stirs up some things, maybe brings some people into your life or shows some things to you through the scripture, and you all of a sudden begin to realize, oh, I've been dealing with this situation in the wrong way. Do you know how powerful it is for God to turn that over? It's not easy, but for then you to go to your team and say, hey, I didn't even know I was doing this. Like, somebody brought this to my attention. I really want to tell you guys I'm sorry, and I'm going to be working on this. Do you know how much that elevates you and the mind of the people that you're working with? Same thing, parents, when we're leading our kids. When we go to our kids and say, hey, Dad's working on this. Like, I'm not perfect, and God's beginning to show me some things, and I just want to tell you I'm sorry for handling this. Many of us grew up in a generation where we never heard anybody say they were sorry, especially our parents. But do you know what that does in the life of your children? To be able to say, oh, I'm a work in progress. I'm growing. I'm sorry I handled it that way. God's still working on me. How about this? This is a different perspective, that God overturns something in our life, searches us, and shows us the lies that we've been believing. Sometimes you don't know something is a lie until it's revealed, right? You believe it because it sounds so much like the truth. Do you know this in the verse when it says, show me if there's any offensive way in me? It can also be translated grievous. Like, show me if there's anything in me that grieves you, God. Now, I looked at it from this angle this week, is that I have a 16-year-old daughter, And the world, our culture, her friends tell her things so many times that just aren't true. And sometimes I'll hear that come out of her mouth, or I'll hear her respond in a certain way about herself and how she sees herself. And I have to immediately get involved with that because it grieves me as a father, right? No, baby. I don't know who told you that, but that's not true. That's not how I see you. That's not how anybody else sees you. That's not how God sees you. Like, don't believe that. Hey, parents, did you know this? That teenage girls from the time that they're 10 till they're 16 lose 80% of their confidence. Isn't that amazing? I don't know exactly how you study that or how you come to that percentage, but they ask a group of 10-year-old girls questions when they're about themselves and their confidence level, and then they ask it again in their deep teenage years, and their confidence level has dropped. So as moms and dads, it's our job to come alongside them and let the Lord use us in their lives to turn over those rocks. Oh, no, that grieves me. So sometimes when we're praying this prayer, we come before God and we say, search me. Show me what I'm believing that's just not true, that I've been holding on to and building my life on. And so that's a scary prayer, right? Because normally what's revealed is ugly and is dark, and it must be dealt with. We're asking God to take us into a process. We live in a world now where we snap a picture and we upload it. It's immediately seen by all of our friends and our family. I went to the Philippines back in November. I discovered I have 792 new Filipino friends on Facebook now, and they like everything, but they like it in the middle of the night because they're on the other side of the world. But isn't that amazing? You could take a picture and then everyone see it. I'm in the stage of life too where I had to sign a contract. I would not post anything about my daughter or pictures of her without her permission, or I would no longer be her dad. You know that? But again, I feel like I'm being nostalgic today, but I remember a time when that was not possible. Some of you did not grow up in a moment like that. Do you remember when the Polaroid camera, like when you got? So if you're too young, I think it came back around. It's a little vintage now. People have those. But you would snap a picture and it would come out this little white piece of paper and then you would shake it like a polo. Anyway, so that's where that line comes from in the song, by the way. You shake it and blow on it, and then 3 minutes later you'd have an image, and it might have been good, it might have been bad. You could take another one. That was huge. But I also remember the time before that when you had 35 millimeter camera. I just grabbed a little disposable one today. You'd wind that thing up. I'm gonna take a picture of you guys. All right, so you'd wind it up, and you'd take pictures, or you had to get the film, 35 millimeter film, and you would put it in your camera. Remember this? You had to have an engineering degree to do it just right. Put it in there. You would take pictures, and then you would take that little roll of film. Do you guys remember this? You would put it in an envelope. You go to Walgreens or wherever you got your pictures developed, and then they would send it off to the lab to have those pictures developed, and you would pray and fast and believe God that those pictures would be good and not just pictures of your foot that you do. And so they would come back, but here, and you would be excited. You'd open them up and look at them. But that little envelope would go off from there to another facility, and it would go through a process. That film was exposed to 9 different chemicals. And at any point during that, if someone opened the door of the dark room, then the film would be ruined. Like the image would be exposed and it wouldn't come out. And oftentimes with our character, we think because we live in an instantaneous world that character is developed like that. We discover it somehow. It's there and it comes out. But listen, it's not about being discovered. You have to be developed. And listen, come on. Development almost always happens in the dark. It always happens when nobody's looking. It happens when we're honest enough and risky enough to come before God and say, here I am. Please show me if there's anything. Like turn over the rock, turn over the law. See if there's anything in my heart, anything in my soul that's offensive or grievous to you. How about this? Prayer number 2, scary prayer. Lord, I surrender. Tell Jesus we said hello. So He's calling. He's calling. Lord, I surrender. Most famous version of this prayer comes out of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. Look at it together in Luke chapter 22. He says, Father, if you're willing, take this cup, this cross from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. What a massive, scary prayer for so many of us to pray, but an enormous reward. Because Jesus surrenders his will, like we're all sitting here. Because Jesus faces something being crushed by the sins of the world, something that none of us will ever face, more than we've ever faced. Because he has faced that, we now can face that in our lives. This prayer of, I really don't want this. I don't know why this is the way, but I trust you and I choose your will. I surrender to you. Sometimes we view the word of surrender as negative, right? We're surrendering to an enemy, but really it's about giving up ownership in our lives. It's like turning over control to the Lord. And sometimes Jesus will come to us and he will encourage us and lead us in another direction, and we'll have to surrender, and that's because he has something better, right? You write that out to the side. He has something better for you. Almost all of us somewhere along the way prayed a prayer for somebody we were dating and thought, this is the one. This is the one I need to be with forever. Please, God, let all this work out. And then you broke up and you bumped into them 20 years later and you had like a little worship service because you're like, thank God you didn't answer that prayer. Oh, Jesus, you are so good. And they were singing the same song, right? Hopefully, yeah. So if you're looking at the person, if you're sitting beside the person you're married to, you need to laugh and look at them and go, that's right, baby. That's right. Tell them. Sometimes God has something better. Sometimes when God leads us to a place and we need to surrender, it's because God can see what I can't. We have such a limited view, right? I mean, we're looking through a pinhole. Sometimes we get angry with God. Sometimes we push back against God. Sometimes we rebel against God. But our viewpoint is so small. Sometimes God says to us, hey, not this way, and we have to surrender because I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready for that. It's not that it's bad. It's just it's too heavy for you to carry. It's not the right season. God's got to line some things up. I had a pastor mentor friend. We were talking about the conversations that you have with your children and when it's appropriate to have them with your children. Do you know what I mean? Like certain levels of conversations. And it could be about sexuality, could be about issues of money, could be about all kind of emotional things that you're going to talk with your children about along the way. And he told a story about having this conversation with his little boy one day, and his little boy wanted to know something, and it was really beyond the purview of what he needed to know at that age. And he says, when can I know this? When can we talk about this? And he just glanced over, and in the garage was this massive, heavy toolbox, to which he said to his little boy, we'll talk about this when you can pick that up. So what did the little boy do? He went over and he couldn't pick it up. And he said, that's right, because that's too heavy for you to carry, and this conversation is too heavy for you to carry. You're not ready. And I think the Lord does that to us too. He says it many times to us, hey, I'm not ready to talk to you about. I'm not ready to lead you into this season. Your character still needs to be developed, right? If I shine a light on that right now, you're going to crumble. Like you need to let some things get exposed. You need to surrender to some things. In 2008, I've told the story a couple of times, but we were meeting at an old shopping center. Most of you know this story over off Quebec and County Line. And I live in Castle Rock, and I live in the Meadows. And so I would drive to work every day, and all of this, this area where Cabela's is and none of that was there in 2008. And so I would stop in that area, and I would climb up onto a hill there where Cabela's is and shoo away some goats, and I would just pray and trespass and pray. God will forgive you, I guess. And so, and I would just pray, God, please, please, please. This seems like a perfect place for a church. We need to build a church like right here in this community. This church needs a community. And I would ask God for that over and over again. And I've even shown through the years some pictures that I drew in my journal up here on the screen. Well, what I didn't know is at that time, God in 2007 and 8 was telling a couple that was about to retire who owned this piece of property to sell it to a church. God was telling this couple, hey, I don't want you to retire there. I want you to sell this 12 and a half acres to a church. They sold it to a church in this community, which held on to that for many years and did all kind of development work on this piece of property. Spent a lot of money developing that for the kingdom. And then we bought it in 2013, 14, and then developed it and then built this building. You see, God answered my prayer in 2008, and I had to surrender and say, Lord, not your will, but my will. Why? Because we weren't ready. I wasn't ready. I was 32 years old. I couldn't find, anyway, so I'm just going to stop right there. I wasn't ready. And sometimes God will say to us, hey, not yet. Come on, not yet. And we have to surrender to that because it really is about giving up my rights. It's about saying, God, I believe you're in control and I really don't have any rights. I've surrendered myself to you and to your lordship in my life, and I believe you're good. Because it all comes down to this, an exchange of trust. You'll never say, I surrender to God unless you believe he's a good father. My son was home from college over Christmas, and we were having this big discussion. We're having a big discussion about tattoos, everybody. And he wants to get this tattoo. I love tattoos. I don't have any tattoos. I love tattoos. I love your tattoos. I just am not excited about my 18-year-old putting something permanent on his body until he's ready to carry that toolbox and make that decision. Because I remember what I would have put on my body when I was 18 years old. No fear right across my chest. Whatever was cool at that time. And I was like, hey, come on. So we had this long discussion. You know what I'm talking about? Anyway, so intense. He's intense. He's a unicorn. He's a hurricane. He's fired. So we had this long discussion about this. I said, listen, when you graduate from college, I'll pay for it. But I just want you to have this moment to like decide, to think, wait. And so it's so intense. We're getting after it, having a great Christmas vacation. It was so fun. But ultimately he submitted because he's 18. He could go and do whatever he wants, right? But ultimately in that moment, he submitted and said, okay, I don't believe you. I know I'm going to want this. But I trust you because I'm his father. And we have 18 years of, listen, I want what's best for you. And so again, it wasn't about tattoos. It was about a relationship. And sometimes in our life, we get so hung up on things and we go, God, what do you want me to do? Here's something else that I think is important for me to say in this area is it's not just something that God reveals to you in prayer, but how about this? Has God already spoken on this subject? Meaning, what does the Bible already say about this? Sometimes we're praying and asking God, what should I do? What should I do? And God has already spoken on that subject about how to treat people, areas of generosity and areas of our sexuality, things when it comes in our marriage. God has already spoken on this. And that's where the rub comes is, am I going to surrender to what God has already revealed as true, even if I don't agree with it? Number 3, this is a scary prayer, is Lord, send me. That's a risky prayer. You could write out beside that or underneath it, Lord, use me. It's a sexy idea to be sent by God or to be used by God until he calls your name. Until he says, hey, would you do this? I'd like for you to talk to this person. I'd like to send you to this place. Look at this verse in Isaiah 6. It's just one of the quintessential verses about this. And Isaiah the prophet walks into the temple and sees God high and lifted up, exalted, seated on a throne. He says, then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And he said, here am I, send me. Now, he says that because he's had an encounter with God and it's radically changed him. Like it disrupted his whole world. And he says, I can't help but go. I have to go because God has done such a great work in my life. But when we pray a prayer like, here am I, send me, we don't know what that will mean on the other side of that, right? We don't know where we're going or what nation we're going to or whether or not we're walking across the street to do something. Sometimes it's scarier to go across the street than it is to go across the world. But God is asking us to be willing to go anywhere and do anything. That's what that surrender moment is. It's scary. But just imagine as we pray that prayer and we surrender, we ask God to search us and we say, hey, please send me, like what the return is on the other side of that. And some of you could stand up today and tell your story of God sending you. God sending you with a purpose or an assignment. And it was scary and it was life altering for you. Being willing to go anywhere and do anything, praying these high risk prayers. Now, I want to just close today with this idea. This is a great opportunity to maybe obey this prayer or to pray this prayer and hear God listening, hear God's voice as he listens to you. In the next couple of weeks, as I said, we're going to have Easter. And there are 49 chairs, in this room. And it is God's desire that every one of them be filled with someone hearing hope and good news and hearing the message of Jesus. There are literally tens of thousands of people in our community who are trying to find their way home and trying to find their way back to God. And God is already at work in their life. He's already stirring them up. But here, look at me. Here is the issue. Is that they're in your circle of influence. And the only Bible they will ever read is you. And the only Jesus they will ever see is you. And one of the ways that we can allow God to use us is to be inviters, is to say to somebody in our office or on our kids' sports team or down the street, hey, you got anywhere to go on Easter? And I'll promise you this, every single time someone comes to Journey, and maybe today's your first time here, is that we do everything we can to help people, no matter where they are, to take their next step with Jesus. I hope you know that in this place. But here's what I also want to promise you. If you pray that prayer, God send me, and you work up enough of that courage and faith to let God use you in that, and then you sit down in a service in a couple of weeks and somebody comes and sits beside you in that service. Listen, I really believe that person's going to be blessed. I believe that person's going to see the heart of Jesus and they're going to take their next steps. But guess what? Listen, this is so important, is you're going to experience Easter and that service like you never have before. You see gathering together with believers like this, doing church differently when someone is sitting beside you trying to find their way home. You just do. You experience you understand more about why we do what we do here, honestly. And there's something about God using you to help somebody else find their way that is massive. Like you were made for that. You were born for that. And guess what? At some point, all of us sat in a chair like this because somebody else was willing to pray that prayer and obey whatever God told them to do. To reach out, to encourage, to bring you along. And you sat in that chair and it made a massive difference in your life. So, will you pray a prayer like that over the next few weeks? God, send me. Use me in somebody's life. These are scary, radically risky prayers because if God answers them, they have the power to disrupt our lives, but they also have the power to yield huge returns.